October 1996. It was a crisp Sunday morning in Cedar Hollow, a quiet town nestled deep in Missouri. The kind of place where the biggest events were bake sales and fall festivals, where children biked down leaf-covered streets without fear, and where everyone knew your name and your secrets. At St. Augustine's Church, the children's choir was preparing for the upcoming Harvest Mass. The rehearsal echoed through the high vaulted nave, their small voices lifting sacred hymns into beams of morning light that streamed through stained glass saints. Michael Green, just 8 years old, was the smallest in the choir. With soft brown curls and a quiet demeanor, he was the kind of boy teachers described as polite and gentle. He often trailed behind the others, clutching his hymnal like a lifeline. That morning he'd seemed distant, staring off at the grand pipe organ more than once. At 10:17 a.m., Michael asked to use the restroom. A volunteer pointed him down the hall toward the side corridor. He walked off in his freshly polished dress shoes, trailing echoes across the old floorboards. He never came back. At first, no one noticed. Children are easily distracted, after all. Maybe he went to the wrong room. Maybe he was playing in the sacristy. But after 15 minutes, then 30, panic began to creep into the choir director's chest. The church was searched from narthex to bell tower. Police were called. Parents sobbed. Volunteers yelled out his name through the rows of pews and down every narrow stairwell. But there was no sign of Michael. No shoe prints, no open windows, no signs of struggle. It was as if he had simply vanished, absorbed into the old bones of the church. Days turned to weeks. Posters were taped to telephone poles. A candlelight vigil was held in front of the church, hundreds of tiny flames flickering in the October wind. The town mourned. The case went cold. Michael Green became a name whispered in classrooms, a warning from parents, a tragic headline that faded like fog. 21 years later, in 2017, St. Augustine's was falling apart. Years of disuse had left it quiet, dusty, and peeling, a relic. A historical preservation grant was finally approved, and contractors were hired to begin restoration. One of them, Jack Merrill, was tasked with cleaning and refitting the antique pipe organ. The towering instrument hadn't been played in years. Dust clung to its pipes like a shroud, and when Jack reached inside one of the deepest vertical tubes to remove a blockage, his fingers met something soft and wrong. At first, he thought it was debris, but when he pulled it out, he stared in disbelief. It was a child's black dress shoe, small, worn, with a faint scuff on the toe. His breath caught. A chill ran down his spine. Then he reached in again and pulled out a second shoe, a perfect match. Stuffed inside, carefully crumpled, was a torn page from an old hymnal. Written across it in shaky pencil were 4 letters. Help! Jack dropped the shoe and stumbled back. The church suddenly felt suffocating, empty but not silent, as if something had been waiting all these years. When the police arrived, they sealed off the building. Detectives reopened the Michael Green case. The shoes matched the pair described in the original report. The hymnal paper came from the exact edition the choir used in 1996. But there was something stranger, something even more disturbing. The pipe where the shoes had been found? It was sealed on both ends, a decorative vertical pipe soldered shut decades ago, with no apparent access from either side. So how, then, had the shoes gotten inside? And who had placed that message? The discovery of Michael Green's shoes shocked Cedar Hollow. For the first time in 2 decades, the church that had long sat like a sleeping monument was now the epicenter of a mystery, darker and stranger than anyone had imagined. Detective Sarah Linden, recently reassigned to cold cases, stood beneath the dim, stained glass shadows of St. Augustine's sanctuary. She was 38, sharp-eyed and not easily rattled, but when she held the little shoe in her gloved hands and saw the crumpled hymnal page inside it, the word "help" written in desperate pencil, she felt something shift inside her. "This wasn't a prank," she said quietly to the parish priest, Father Douglas. He was old now, stooped with silver hair and trembling hands, but he'd been there the day Michael disappeared. "He was just a boy," the priest whispered. "He had no enemies, no reason to run." Sarah set the shoe down on a plastic evidence mat. "This message, it wasn't from a kid trying to sneak attention. You don't hide shoes in a sealed pipe. Someone wanted them hidden, but they also wanted them found." Father Douglas looked away. "You think someone from the church?" She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the organ and ran her fingers along the elaborate wooden casing. Carved into it were Gothic flourishes, angelic figures, and Latin inscriptions. Beautiful, hollow things. She imagined Michael's small form somewhere inside, trapped, silent, waiting to be found. "How often was this organ played after '96? She asked. "Only a few times. It was too damaged. Some pipes had stopped working altogether. That one," he pointed to the one where the shoes were found, "hasn't sounded since the early '90s. Sarah nodded. The pipe had been silent, even before Michael vanished. That night, she reviewed the original case file. She found something that sent a cold ripple down her spine. In the weeks before his disappearance, Michael had drawn pictures during Sunday school. Most of them were ordinary: stick figures, crosses, flowers. But one drawing, dated just 3 days before he vanished, showed something different. It was a crude outline of the church interior: the altar, the pews, the organ. And behind the organ, barely visible in a smudged corner, was a stick figure trapped inside a pipe. Over it, in child's handwriting, "No one hears him." Sarah stared at it, heart pounding. Had Michael known something? Had he seen something? Or had he been trying to leave clues before it was too late? She decided to meet with one of Michael's childhood friends, Derek McGill. Now in his 30s, a high school teacher who still lived in town. He hadn't spoken about Michael in years. At first, Derek seemed hesitant, distant, but then he said something that made her stop cold. "The day he disappeared," Derek said, "Michael told me something weird. He said the organ could swallow sounds. I thought it was just his imagination, but he was scared. I remember. He asked me if people could get lost inside music." Sarah leaned forward. "Did you tell anyone at the time?" "No, I thought he was just being poetic. Like a weird kid thing." But Sarah didn't think it was just that. She believed the organ was more than a symbol. It had become part of the crime. A container, a vault. Someone had used it, perhaps during that very rehearsal, to conceal something. Or someone. She returned to the church again at dusk. The interior was bathed in blue twilight, cold and empty. She stood near the choir risers, eyes fixed on the organ. Then, slowly, she pulled the hymnal from the choir's archive room, the exact version from 1996. Flipping through the worn pages, she stopped on hymn number 274, the one found in the shoe. Its title was haunting: "Deliver us, O Lord, from the depths." She ran her hand across the page, and there, faint but real, she saw something. An indentation pressed into the paper, as if someone had written over it before tearing it out. Sarah took out a pencil and began shading over the back of the page. A second message slowly appeared. "He's still in the walls." Detective Sarah Linden stared at the words forming under her pencil strokes. "He's still in the walls." It was a message hidden beneath the surface of the hymnal page, pressed in so faintly it had been nearly lost to time. Who had written it? And more importantly, when? Had Michael been alive when the shoes were hidden? Was he trying to say he was still trapped somewhere inside the church? She turned to the pipe once more. It made no sense. The pipe in which the shoes were found was sealed tight on both ends, soldered decades ago. No one could have slipped something inside unless they had access before it was sealed, or unless it had been unsealed and then resealed again. But even that theory was full of holes. Sarah called in a structural engineer to examine the organ's construction. After hours of inspection, he confirmed the troubling truth. That particular pipe wasn't just decorative, he said. It was functional, until the early 90s. But during a restoration around 1992, it was sealed shut for unknown reasons. There's no access port. No way those shoes could have gotten in there, unless someone tampered with it before or during that restoration. Sarah narrowed her eyes. Do we have records of who worked on that project? He shrugged. Your best bet is to check the church archives, but I'll tell you this. Someone went to a lot of trouble to make sure that pipe stayed closed. She returned to Father Douglas with questions. Who restored the organ in 1992? He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. It was a small local team, mostly volunteers. One of them was a man named Alan Keene. He was quiet, worked with wood, helped repair the pipes, but, well, he disappeared in '97, just stopped showing up. Sarah's blood went cold. Disappeared when? About 6 months after Michael. Did anyone look for him? We assumed he left town. He didn't have family here. Sarah made her way to the dusty basement archives of the church. The air was thick with mold and the scent of crumbling paper. In a filing cabinet marked Facilities, 1992, she found it. A list of volunteers and contractors for the organ restoration. Alan Keene's name was there, along with a note. Authorized to access internal pipe structure. Specialized access panel key issued. Access panel? She returned to the church and examined the organ more carefully. The front casing was ornate, but upon closer inspection, she discovered something strange beneath one of the carved angels. A narrow, nearly invisible seam. She inserted a thin tool and pried it open. Inside, hidden behind the decorative front, was a small, tarnished key still hanging on a rusty nail. It matched the access plate to the central organ shaft. Sarah's heart pounded as she inserted the key and turned it. A quiet click echoed through the sanctuary. The panel creaked open, revealing a narrow crawl space that led deep into the vertical column structure of the organ. With a flashlight in hand, Sarah climbed inside. The space was barely wide enough for her shoulders. Dust floated in the beam of her light like old spirits. As she moved forward, the walls began to narrow, almost forcing her to crawl. Then she saw it. Scratches, faint gouges in the wooden interior, as if small fingernails had clawed at it in desperation. Further down, a piece of fabric, torn, faded blue, a child's choir robe. She covered her mouth. And then, something worse. Scrawled on the inner wall, in pencil now faded to gray, he sings to himself so they don't hear him cry. Sarah backed out of the shaft, heart thudding in her chest. There was no doubt now. Michael hadn't simply vanished. Someone had hidden him, and had expected he would never be found, and whoever that person was, had once walked freely among the choir, the pews, and the faithful. Detective Sarah Linden couldn't sleep that night. The scratches inside the organ, the torn robe, the scribbled messages that read like the final words of a child forgotten by the world. The truth was clawing its way out of the walls, and it was bringing decades of silence down with it. She focused now on Alan Keene, the volunteer craftsman who helped restore the organ in 1992 and vanished just 6 months after Michael did. She dug into county records, church rosters, even old phone books. It took time, but she finally found an address, an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town, now abandoned. The next morning, she drove there. The property was overgrown, choked with weeds and rusting wire fencing. A mailbox with peeling paint still bore the name Keene in faded black stencil. She stepped onto the front porch. The boards groaned beneath her feet. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was stale with disuse. Dust covered everything. Furniture, picture frames, broken tools. The house was a relic of another life, a time sealed off from the present, like that organ pipe had sealed in a boy's final cry. In the living room, she found what looked like a small woodshop setup. Carving tools lay in place, undisturbed for years. On the workbench, a half-finished piece of decorative molding, identical to the trim along the organ at St. Augustine's. He had been building parts for the church. Here. She opened a drawer. Inside, bundled in twine, were sketches, blueprints of the organ. Some standard, others disturbing. One detailed a hidden compartment accessible only through a side panel. Another diagram showed a modified pipe interior with small hand-drawn arrows, paths that led nowhere. Then Sarah found something worse, a notebook. At first, it seemed like a journal, simple records of work, personal reflections. But the further she read, the more the words unraveled. The boy watches me while I work, doesn't say much, just listens. He hums while I shape the wood. I told him not to tell. I think he understands. He asked where the sound goes when it dies. I told him it stays inside the organ. He said that's where he wants to live, in the music, forever. Some nights I hear him crying in the walls. Sarah froze. This wasn't just a craftsman. This man had access, trust, influence, and possibly he had manipulated Michael into silence. Or worse, she flipped to the last page. One sentence was written again and again. He asked me to lock it, so no one else could come in. Lock what? She searched the house further and found a cellar door tucked behind the kitchen. It took effort to pull it open. The stairs creaked downward into shadow. She descended slowly. The basement was cold and dry. In the center sat an old cedar chest. It looked hand-built, the same kind of wood used in the organ's restoration. She opened it. Inside was a child's backpack, faded, dusty, with the name Michael G. still written on the tag. Sarah stepped back, heart racing. Suddenly the air felt heavier, like the weight of everything long buried had followed her down into that basement. Alan Keene hadn't just vanished. He had left behind a shrine, and perhaps a confession. But there was still no record of his body, no trace of where he went after 1997. That night, back in her office, Sarah stared at the wall of evidence she'd built. A pattern was forming. Michael hadn't just been hidden, he had been silenced. And if Alan had something to hide, he hadn't taken it with him, because in the back of that notebook, tucked behind the final page, was a folded photograph of a group of boys in choir robes. One of them was Michael, and beside him, smiling faintly, stood another boy no one had mentioned in the original case files. Sarah flipped the photo over. One name had been scribbled in ink. Eli. The name on the back of the photograph, Eli, was written in a shaky hand, barely legible. Sarah scanned the church's old choir rosters and parish records, flipping through dozens of names. No Eli, not officially. But then she noticed a discrepancy. In the summer choir of 1996, 11 boys were photographed and listed in the church newsletter. But only 10 names were documented. No Eli. Sarah brought the photo to Father Douglas. His face tightened when she pointed at the unfamiliar boy. That might be Eli Morgan, he said after a pause. He wasn't officially part of the choir. His mother used to clean the church. She'd bring him along, and he'd sit quietly in the pews while we rehearsed. Sometimes, if someone was absent, we'd let him fill in. Why wasn't he on the records? Father Douglas gave her a tired look. Because he didn't exist in the system. No school enrollment, no baptism, no address we could verify. His mother was secretive. Sarah pressed harder. Do you know where they lived? He hesitated. In a trailer behind Old Birch Road, but it was cleared out years ago. Sarah tracked the location, and hours later she stood at the overgrown edge of a wooded lot. The trailer was gone, but beneath the brush she found remnants. A rusted swing, a sun-bleached plastic chair, and burned wood planks shaped like a porch foundation. It looked like it had caught fire long ago. Among the ashes and debris, something glinted. She knelt down and pulled out a warped metal tag. She brushed away the soot. It was a church visitor badge, stamped faintly in the corner. Alan Keene, Maintenance Access. Her breath caught. Keene had been here. She began searching the perimeter. Behind the old trailer foundation, she discovered a shallow depression in the earth, covered in moss and dead branches. It wasn't deep, but the outline was suspiciously square. A forgotten root cellar? She marked the location and called in a team. By late afternoon, forensic technicians had unearthed what was once a storm shelter, now rotted and partially collapsed. Inside, buried beneath wood and mold, was a box. Inside the box, tightly wrapped in plastic and cloth, were more drawings, childlike, disturbing. One showed a tall man holding the hand of two small boys, one labeled M and the other E. In the corner was a crooked, smiley face drawn in red crayon with no eyes. Another picture showed the interior of a pipe, a boy curled up inside it, scribbled over with the word hide. A third drawing chilled her the most. It showed the sanctuary of the church. But something was different. Behind the altar, scribbled in black marker, was a door that wasn't supposed to be there, and beside it, a stick figure standing alone. The name written beside it, Eli. That night, Sarah sat alone in her office reviewing it all. If Eli existed, and had been this close to Michael, why had no one looked for him? Why was his name never reported? And most of all, why did Alan Keene visit him? She opened the carpenter's notebook again. Tucked in the centerfold was a single line scribbled across the margin. The quiet ones know where the echo lives. She picked up the photo again and looked at Eli's expression. He wasn't smiling. He was watching something. No, someone. Michael. And now Sarah had one terrifying thought she couldn't shake. What if Eli had been watching everything the whole time and never said a word? Good. The next morning, Sarah met with a local historian, Mrs. Jenkins, who had lived in the town for over 50 years. She hoped Mrs. Jenkins could shed some light on the mysterious boy, Eli, and the church's darker history. Mrs. Jenkins adjusted her glasses and sighed. That church has secrets, detective. When I was young, there were rumors about the organ and the people who worked on it. Sarah leaned in. What kind of rumors? Whispers about a man who came every week, not for prayer, but for something else. They said he was obsessed with the organ's pipes, that he could hear voices in them. Sarah's mind immediately went to Alan Keene. Was this man connected to Alan Keene? Mrs. Jenkins nodded slowly. Some said he was a carpenter, but others thought he was something darker. They said children were never quite safe near him. Sarah's phone buzzed. It was the lab. The results of the plastic toy found behind the shed, the one connected to the second disappearance, were back. DNA from the toy matched a profile in the system. Eli Morgan. Sarah's heart sank. Eli wasn't just a forgotten name or a shadow in a photograph. He was real. And now, a second cold case was suddenly intertwined with Michael's. As Sarah pondered the connection, Father Douglas called her. I found something you need to see, he said. At the church archives, he showed her an old letter dated 1995. It was from the organ's original builder to the parish council. The letter warned about hidden compartments within the organ, secret spaces built for the protection of the vulnerable. Sarah frowned. Protection? Father Douglas nodded gravely. The original builder believed the organ could be a refuge, but over the years that idea twisted. Some say it became a prison instead. Sarah felt the weight of the words. The church organ was no longer just an instrument of music. It was a vault of secrets, a place where innocent lives were hidden, lost, or trapped. And Eli might hold the key to unlocking the full horror. Sarah returned to St. Augustine's Church with a small team of specialists, structural engineers, organ restorers, and forensic experts. Their goal was clear. Investigate the organ itself, piece by piece, to find any hidden compartments or clues that could explain how Michael's shoes ended up inside the pipes. They carefully disassembled the organ pipes, one by one. The church's silence was heavy, broken only by the metallic clinks of tools and hushed murmurs. Then, behind a false panel deep inside the organ structure, they found it. A concealed cavity just large enough to hide a small child, or at least evidence of one. Inside, there was a dusty, tattered hymn book, the same hymnal Michael had been practicing from all those years ago. On its pages were smudged pencil marks, and in a shaky hand the word "help" was scrawled repeatedly. Nearby lay a small, folded note. It read, "Eli told me to hide here. The music keeps us safe." Sarah's heart pounded. It was a message from Michael himself. The forensic team also discovered traces of dried mud, fragments of fabric, and a faded stain that might have been blood. Suddenly, the horror of what had happened here became real. Sarah's phone rang. It was the lab again. New results from a partial fingerprint lifted from the organ restoration tools. The fingerprint matched Alan Keene. The man had touched the very tools used to build the hidden spaces. But even more disturbing, small traces of a child's DNA were found on those tools. Sarah realized that Alan Keene hadn't just restored the organ, he had used it to hide. And that meant Michael, and perhaps Eli, had been trapped inside the church itself. But where was Eli now? Had he escaped, or was he lost in those dark pipes forever? As Sarah pieced together the puzzle, she knew one thing for certain. The church's silence was a carefully crafted lie, and the echo of those lost children's voices was only just beginning to be heard. As the investigation deepened, Sarah received an unexpected call from an elderly woman named Mrs. Collins, who claimed she had crucial information about Eli Morgan. Sarah agreed to meet her at a small cafe on the edge of town. Mrs. Collins was once a church caretaker and had been familiar with the building's inner workings. With trembling hands, she pulled out a worn photograph, one that matched the one Sarah had found, showing Eli and Michael in choir robes. "I knew Eli well," Mrs. Collins whispered. "He was a quiet boy, always watching. One day he confided in me that he and Michael had been hiding in the organ pipes to escape someone—" Alan Keene. Sarah's heart pounded. What happened next? Mrs. Collins's eyes filled with tears. "One night, Alan caught them. He was angry, violent. He locked them inside the organ's hidden compartments. Michael never came out, but Eli managed to escape, though he was never the same." "Where is Eli now?" Sarah asked. "No one knows. After that night he vanished. Some say he ran away, others say he was taken by someone else. But before he disappeared, he left behind a clue." She handed Sarah a small, rusted key. This was found near the church's old shed, near where they found the burnt license plate and toy. Sarah's mind raced. The key might unlock more than just a door. It could unlock the truth. Back at the church, Sarah searched for a lock matching the key and found a small, rusted box hidden beneath loose floorboards in the vestry. Inside, she discovered letters, journals, and photographs, records of Alan Keene's crimes and confessions from those he'd threatened to keep silent. Among the papers was a chilling note from Eli. "They say I'm invisible, but I am here. I know what happened. I see the truth, even if no one else does." Sarah felt the weight of years of silence lifting. The final piece was falling into place. Eli had survived, a silent witness bearing the scars of a dark past. His escape had saved a life, but the shadows of the church's sins still lingered. The truth was out, and now those who had hidden behind the organ's music would face their reckoning. The revelations shook the town to its core. News of Alan Keene's crimes, the hidden compartments in the church organ, and the tragic fate of Michael Green spread quickly. Public outrage grew, demanding answers and justice. Sarah led a formal inquiry into the church's role in the decades of silence. The parish council faced intense scrutiny, and several officials resigned amid accusations of negligence and cover-up. Meanwhile, efforts to find Eli Morgan intensified. A renewed search was launched with the hope that he might still be alive, a survivor who could finally tell his story. In a surprising turn, Eli was found living under an assumed name in a nearby city, frail and withdrawn, but alive. His testimony confirmed the darkest parts of the investigation. Alan Keene had used his position to prey on children, imprisoning them in the church's secret spaces. Eli's courage to speak out opened a floodgate of confessions and uncovered other victims. The church, once a sanctuary, was revealed to be a cage for unspeakable horrors. But amid the sorrow, a healing began. Michael's mother received closure she had long been denied. The community came together to restore the church, not just its walls, but its spirit. A memorial was erected near the organ, inscribed with the names of the lost children, a solemn reminder that silence only shelters darkness. As Sarah stood there, listening to the faint, haunting echoes of the organ's pipes, she knew the truth had finally been heard. Yet, the question remained. How many more secrets were still hidden in the shadows of the past, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them? The mystery had ended, but the echoes would never fade.